The air in Nassau was a thick soup of rum, sweat, and rot. To 17-year-old Bonny, it smelled like freedom. This was her escape. Back in Carolina, her wealthy father tried to marry her off to a powdered aristocrat. He offered her a gilded cage. Anne burned it to the ground, running off with a worthless pirate named James Bonny. He was just a match she used to light her old life on fire. He'd brought her to this pirate den, promising riches, but became a sniveling informant for Governor Woodus Rogers, the man sworn to hang them all. She was married to a rat in a city of wolves, and it made her sick. Every night she stared at the harbor, at the black flag snapping in the wind. She didn't want their gold, she wanted their courage. Then, in a tavern that reeked of spilled dreams, she saw him. Not the biggest man, but one who moved with a purpose. He wore a calico vest, his ambition a fire in his eyes. He was John Rackham, Calico Jack. He looked at Anne and didn't see a prize. He saw a reflection of his own fire. Their connection was instant, a spark in a powder keg. While her husband growled, Anne conspired. Jack spoke of a ship, the Revenge, and a life where the only king was the horizon. He offered her the one thing she craved, real freedom. The choice was no choice at all. One moonless night, Bonny, dressed as a man, slipped aboard the Revenge. As the ship cut through the black water, the last of her chains dissolved into the sea. Across the Atlantic, another life was a carefully constructed lie. Mary Read had never known what it was to be a girl. Born in secret, she was raised as her dead brother, Mark, to secure an inheritance. The lie became her skin. While other girls learned to sew, Mark learned the cold steel of a sword. She joined a British army, the mud and blood of Flanders her only home. Survival was her mantra. Every day was a performance on a knife's edge. She was good at it, too good. She could drink, swear, and fight better than most men. A single mistake would implode her world. For a brief, beautiful moment, she found love with a soldier who saw past the disguise. They deserted, married, and opened an inn, a fragile peace. It ended when he died of a sudden fever, and the world's cruelty rushed back in. So Mark Read was reborn, a ghost re-enlisting in the army. But with peace, there was no work. Drifting and desperate, she took passage on a ship bound for the West Indies. A new start, a new lie. But the sea is lawless. Her ship was taken by pirates. Faced with a choice, join or die, Mark Read adapted. The hardened soldier was a natural pirate. His sword was quick, his nerve unbreakable. He earned the respect of the cutthroats he now called crewmates. They saw a quiet, deadly young man. They had no idea the secret he carried was heavier than any chest of gold. Fate, with a dark sense of humor, eventually led Mark Read onto a new ship, a sloop that flew a black flag with a skull and two crossed cutlasses. The captain was a charismatic rogue in a calico vest. His name was Calico Jack. Aboard the Revenge, the two women's paths were set to collide. Anne, the fiery noblewoman turned pirate queen, ruled the deck beside her lover. And Mark, the silent, deadly soldier, hiding a lifetime of secrets. Anne was instantly drawn to this handsome, new capable recruit. He didn't leer at her, he treated her as an equal. Calico Jack noticed it too. A dark, possessive jealousy began to simmer in him. He saw the way Anne looked at Mark, the long talks, the shared glances. He imagined the worst. One night, fueled by rum, he cornered Anne in their cabin with his hand on his pistol. "I see you with the new whelp, Mark," he snarled. Anne laughed in his face, a sound as sharp as breaking glass. The accusation was absurd, but it planted a seed. She started watching Mark more closely. There was a softness there, a guarded vulnerability she'd never seen in a man. The way his eyes darted away when she held his gaze. She became obsessed. Her quest for freedom had led her here. Now it was threatened not by the law, but by a mystery she couldn't solve. Who was this Mark Reed? One evening, with the ship rocking gently under a canopy of stars, Anne found Mark alone at the rail. This was it. No more games. She pulled her pistol, the cold metal a stark contrast to the humid night air. "I know you have a secret," she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "And I won't have secrets on this ship. Not from me." Mark slowly turned, his eyes wide in the moonlight. For a long second, there was only the sound of the ocean. Then, with a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime, Mark spoke. But the voice that answered wasn't a man's at all. What happens when two of history's most dangerous women, both living a lie, finally find the only other person in the world who understands? The click of Anne's pistol hammer was deafening. Mark Reed didn't flinch. Instead, a slow, weary smile touched her lips. "Put the gun down, Anne," Mary Reed said, her voice its true timbre for the first time on that deck. With a swift movement, she opened her shirt, revealing the linen bindings used to flatten her chest. A secret worn like armor, now undone. Anne froze. The shock gave way to something else, a dizzying, electrifying sense of recognition. The loneliness that had haunted her, even in Jack's arms, suddenly vanished. She wasn't an anomaly. Here was another woman who had chosen a sword over a needle, the sea over a drawing room. She lowered the pistol, a wild laugh escaping her lips. It wasn't mockery, it was pure, unadulterated relief. Calico Jack, his mind still twisted with jealousy, burst from the shadows, cutlass drawn. "What is this?" he roared. Anne stepped in front of Mary, a fierce protector. "This," she said, her eyes blazing, "is the best pirate you've ever recruited." The secret was out, but instead of destroying them, it forged an unbreakable bond, an alliance of two. From that moment on, they were sisters in arms, a single tempest. The men on the Revenge learned quickly to cross one was to face the wrath of both. Their pursuit of freedom was no longer a solo journey. The stakes escalated. With their secret known only to Jack, the trio became a legend in the making. Their attacks grew bolder. They weren't just raiding merchant sloops, they were hunting bigger prey. Anne and Mary fought side by side, a whirlwind of flashing steel and righteous fury. Anne, a feral grin on her face, fought with two pistols, her laughter ringing out over the chaos. Mary, with the cold precision of a trained soldier, led boarding parties, her cutlass a blur. They were terrifying. They were magnificent. They took a fat English merchant ship off Hispaniola, the hold groaning with tobacco and rum. But the real prize was in the captain's quarters, a bound chest. Not with gold, but with official documents. One of them was a proclamation, barely a month old, signed by Governor Woodes Rogers himself, the King's pardon. It offered a full and complete pardon to any pirate who surrendered, a chance to go home, to be forgiven. The crew celebrated, cracking open the captured rum. They spoke of wives and farms, of lives they thought were lost forever. For them, the pardon was a golden ticket out of a life that always ended at the gallows. But as Anne and Mary stood over the document, the parchment feeling like poison in their hands, they felt a cold dread. Forgiveness? Normalcy? For them, that was the cage. That evening, as the drunken crew sang songs of home, Anne and Mary stood at the rail, the King's pardon crumpled in Anne's fist. "They want to go back," Mary said, her voice flat. "Back to being told what to do. Back to being poor, Anne spat. Back to bowing to men who buy their power. They don't understand. She looked at Mary, her eyes reflecting the starlight. This is our home. This is the only place we are not creatures. This is the only place we are free. The pardon wasn't a lifeline, it was an insult, a reminder of the world they had burned down, a world that had no place for them. Their quest for freedom had brought them to a precipice. They could accept the pardon and suffocate slowly, or they could tear it up and be hunted like dogs. Anne smoothed the crumpled parchment. She looked at the official seal, the promise of a life she'd rather die than live. Then she held it over the ship's lantern. The corner caught fire, curling into black ash. She held it until the flames licked her fingertips, then let the burning remains fall into the dark water below. They stood together, watching the last glowing ember hiss and die. They had made their choice. There was no going back. From this moment on, they were fugitives from the entire civilized world. War was declared. By burning the pardon, they had spat in the king's face. Governor Rogers took it personally, putting a bounty on the heads of Calico Jack, Anne Bonny, and Mary Read. Their names were plastered in every port. They were no longer just criminals. They were enemies of the crown. The noose began to tighten. The Caribbean, once a vast playground, felt smaller. The waters choked with Royal Navy warships and pirate hunters. The crew of the Revenge felt the pressure. The thrill of the raid was replaced by a gnawing paranoia. The men grew sloppy, their discipline dissolving in rum. Only Anne and Mary seemed to sharpen under the pressure. The closer the danger, the more alive they felt. They trained relentlessly, their swords ringing on the deck while the men gambled and drank. They were the heart and soul of the Revenge, the keepers of its dying flame of freedom. The man tasked with hunting them down was Captain Jonathan Barnett, a former privateer turned pirate hunter. He was cunning, relentless, and he knew these waters as well as they did. For weeks, he played a cat-and-mouse game with the Revenge, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came in late October 1720. The Revenge was anchored off Negril Bay, Jamaica. They had just seized a Spanish sloop, and the celebration was, even for them, excessive. Casks of wine and rum were rolled onto the deck. Calico Jack, once the sharp-witted captain, was as drunk as the rest. Anne and Mary watched from the shadows of the quarterdeck, a shared sense of disgust and dread passing between them. "Look at them," Anne muttered. "They're celebrating their own funeral." "They have forgotten what it means to be hunted," Mary replied, her hand on her cutlass. This wasn't the life of freedom they had fought for. This was a slow, pathetic suicide. As the moon climbed high, a dark shape detached itself from the coastline. Barnett's sloop, moving silently, without lanterns, closed in. A lookout, too drunk to focus, saw nothing. The first warning was the scrape of hulls, followed by a volley of gunfire that ripped through the night. Chaos. Panic. The pirates of the Revenge, caught completely off guard, scrambled for cover. Some were cut down before they could even stand. Others, including Calico Jack, fled below deck, tumbling into the hold to hide in the darkness like frightened rats. The deck was a slaughterhouse. Barnett's men swarmed over the rails, expecting an easy victory. They were wrong. From the smoke and confusion, two figures emerged: Anne and Mary. They didn't run, they didn't hide, they attacked. This was their ruthless gambit. With their crew broken and their captain a coward, they would become the Revenge. Anne, screaming a curse that would make a sailor blush, fired her pistols, dropping two men before they even set foot on the deck.
She tossed the empty guns aside and drew her cutlass, a wild, terrifying fury in her eyes. Mary moved with a chilling economy of motion, her sword a silver arc of death. For a few desperate minutes, two women held the deck against a dozen armed men. They fought back to back, a whirlwind of steel and defiance. The sounds of their battle were sharp and clear. The clang of cutlass on cutlass, the wet thud of a body falling, Anne's furious war cries. Anne, seeing her crew cowering, screamed down into the hold. "If you would be men, come up and fight." Only silence answered. It was impossible. Two against so many. A blow from a club caught Mary in the shoulder. Anne was disarmed, a sword point at her throat. The fighting stopped. The silence that followed was only broken by the whimpering of the captured men being dragged from the hold. They were captured, defeated not by a superior force, but by the weakness of their own. As they were led away in chains, Anne looked at Calico Jack, his face pale, his vest stained with spilled wine, not blood. There was no love left in her eyes, only a bottomless, burning contempt. They called them monsters. They knew they were the only ones who had truly fought for that word, that idea, that impossible dream. They knew they'd become the only real pirates on the ship.
The trial in Spanish Town, Jamaica was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed with gawkers, craning to see the infamous she-pirates. Anne and Mary stood in the defendant's box, chained and bruised, their defiance a silent rebuke to the whole proceeding. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Calico Jack and the other men were tried first and sentenced to hang, their cowardly silence a pathetic end to their careers. Then it was their turn. The prosecutor painted them as unnatural aberrations, devils in women's flesh. Through it all, Anne and Mary remained silent, their gaze fixed on some point beyond the walls of the courtroom. Their fight for freedom had ended here, in a room filled with men who would never understand it. Guilty, the word echoed. The sentence? To be hanged by the neck until you are dead. The crowd roared. But then, as the judge was about to finalize the proceedings, Mary Read spoke, her voice clear and steady. "My lord," she said, "we plead our bellies." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Pleading the belly, a claim of pregnancy, an old obscure bit of English common law. An unborn child, being innocent, could not be executed. It was a stay of execution, a desperate, brilliant, and utterly unexpected move. An examination was ordered. The court physician confirmed it. It was true. Both Anne Bonny and Mary Read were pregnant. The law which they had so gleefully broken was now their only shield. They were sent not to the gallows, but back to the squalor of the prison, their executions postponed indefinitely. It was not a pardon. It was a different kind of cage. On the day of his execution, Calico Jack was granted one final request: to see Anne. He was led to her cell, a broken man hoping for a final word of comfort. He found none. Anne looked at him through the bars, her eyes as cold and hard as the stone walls. "I am sorry to see you here, Jack," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. And then came the final, brutal twist of the knife, a line that would echo through history. "But if you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." Those were the last words he ever heard from her. He was hanged that day, his body left to rot in a gibbet as a warning to others. The aftermath for the women was quieter but no less grim. The prison was a hellhole of disease and despair. Mary Read, the hardened soldier who had survived battles and betrayals, succumbed to a violent fever shortly after the trial. She died in that filthy prison, her unborn child dying with her. The woman who lived a lie to survive was killed by the simple, brutal truth of biology. And Anne Bonny? History loses her. After the birth of her child, the records simply stop. There is no account of her execution, no record of her release. She vanishes from the page, melting back into the mists of rumor and legend. Did her wealthy father ransom her and spirit her back to a quiet, anonymous life? Did she escape? Did she die, forgotten in that Jamaican jail? No one knows. Her life, which had been a shout of defiance, ended in a whisper. They sought a universe of freedom, and for a short, glorious time they found it. They lived more in 2 years on the open sea than most people do in a lifetime. They were lovers, friends, warriors, and symbols. They proved that courage and ruthlessness were not the property of any gender. History remembers the empires and the kings. Anne remembered the feel of the sea spray on her face. Mary remembered the weight of a sword in her hand. They didn't just break history's rules. They rewrote the sea.